So just a little bit of background on coaching. Coaches enhance employability and performance by facilitating, which is an important aspect of coaching, learning, informed choice, internal commitment to growth, and enhanced performance thereby. The other thing to think about is where coaching is, it's a different approach. So often when we're coaching or we're hearing someone talk about a problem, we go to solve the problem. Coaching is a little bit more helping them think through the problem better, become a better problem solver, and more independent and able to manage things on their own. So it's really the teaching to fish versus giving the fish for the day. And thus, it requires a different approach and set of skills. So uh, instead of directive, which can be fine, which is, the typical management interaction, we help by instructing, advising, sharing knowledge, experience, perspective, giving feedback and corrective suggestions on what we've observed. That is fine, but also coaching leans more toward facilitative help by asking insightful questions, listening, stimulating subordinates to think, reflect, and explore, and by helping others observe themselves and learn from their own experiences. So, a key aspect of this is encouraging others to take more responsibility for themselves, for their performance, for their own development. And thus, it's a little bit more conversational. May require a shift in frame of mind. Distinctive developmental conversation skills are listening and asking powerful questions. Here's one thing I'll ask you to think about. Then in a coaching conversation, unlike some others, you want to be really careful about how much you're listening and asking questions versus talking. So probably not be talking more than 30% of the time, more listening and asking questions and stimulating the other person. Also think about a different way of thinking about the interaction versus just getting something done in the moment. We want to take on a developmental frame of mind to focus on the employee's learning needs versus what you know, playing the role of a facilitator versus an expert or director, transferring commitment and responsibility for development to the employee versus holding them yourself. Okay. We'll just run through this quickly, but things to listen for in coaching is, does the other person have an accurate perception of current performance? Often they may not see themselves or the situation accurately, so the coach helps by finding a way to clarify what is current reality. Do they also have a clear vision of the desired end state? So do they know what good looks like or what better looks like or what good delegation looks like or whatever it is you may be working on? They have some kind of model of that to shoot for. As the old saying goes, fuzzy targets don't get hit. So we want to be clear about, where are we headed? Do they feel some motivation to change? Do they see the importance of it? Do they see the value of it? And if they wanted to change, do they have a means of making the change? So the question, how would I get there from here, is crucial in coaching also. And finally, ongoing assessment and support and follow-up. The people develop best when they have some kind of follow-up, someone checking in, someone helping them kind of measure performance, modify their behavior and their plans according to how things are going. Okay, so those are a few key aspects of coaching. The other thing is, since as the data shows, a lot of people underdo coaching and also could do it better, you might be asking, okay, what's a good model for that? One thing I think is particularly useful is the GROW model. So hopefully this will be a good takeaway for you to think about. It's easy to remember and it has a lot of power. So G in the GROW model stands for the goal or what we want to achieve. So a lot of time in a coaching conversation, people may churn around a little bit about, I don't like this, I don't like that, I can't do this, I can't do that. So really help them to think, okay, well, how would you like it to be? What is the goal here? What is the objective? What are your priorities? And, raise their sights a bit. And that often will raise the energy in the conversation as well. Another thing to think about is the R, which is reality in this model, which is the circumstances we're dealing with or how we perceive them. Especially if they're not seeing themselves accurately, coach may need to help with that. But a lot of times they're just things that they're not seeing, or they could look at the situation in a different way that would enable them to feel a little bit more empowered, motivated, and take more responsibility. The other is options, and this also tends to be underdone in these coaching conversations, which is really to get the person out of the rut of thinking, well, I can either do this or that, dichotomous versus, gosh, there's a lot of possibilities. What would be a more creative kind of win-win option for moving forward than you might currently have thought of? And finally, the way forward, which is, okay, so we are clear on where we want to head. We know what the reality is. We've generated some options. And what are we going to actually do? And when are we going to accomplish it by? And how will we know when it's done? Okay, so this is just a nice little model that works very well in coaching conversations because it kind of keeps things on track and enables to move forward in an efficient and an effective way. The other thing I would say for this is, this is a pretty nice little model also just for if you're looking at the quality of a group meeting, a team meeting, even if you find yourself spinning, in some kind of issue, what you're trying to make a decision about, just ask yourself, okay, what is my goal? What is the reality? What are the options? What are the way forward? And push the envelope a little bit on filling those in. Okay, so that's the GROW model. So I'd say that's a great takeaway in terms of just quality of thinking, but especially if you want a little bit of a model for what can be a little bit amorphous, which is the coaching conversation and where it might head, often helps us to keep things on track to move toward a good outcome. The other thing, probably a lot of you are familiar with stop, start, continue. So especially if you don't have coaching conversations regularly, one thing you might think is just forming it in terms of stop, start, continue, and just a little bit of a methodology for checking in. The continue part enables you always to be positive about something. The start part enables you to kind of look toward new opportunities, new prospects, new growth goals, and stop anything that we're no longer doing, and especially in these current times, that isn't adding value that we want to let go of so we can do things that are more important. Okay, so that's two models. GROW model, stop, start, continue. A lot of time people feel like, I'm not really sure how to start a coaching conversation. Especially in these times where we're remote, it creates a good opportunity to say, okay, hey, how do we want to communicate? How do we want to make sure we're on the same page? What should we do a little bit differently in terms of the regularity and the methods for us kind of communicating to make the best of our situation that we're in? Okay, so that's GROW, stop, start, continue. And then the other thing we have a polling question for is just to look a little bit about feedback, okay? So I'd like to ask you this question, and Nate's gonna get the poll ready for us. Does your organization do a good job of providing ongoing constructive feedback?
And the poll's open now.
Thank you.
Responses are still coming in, so give it a couple more seconds. Okay, I'll go ahead and share.
All right, thanks. Well, it looks like we're right at 50-50. Okay, so it looks like 50% feel like it's working fairly well, and 50% look like it could use some improvement. Okay, and I will say for the issue of feedback, that this tends to be one of the trickier issues in coaching. So the GROW model may be perfectly fine and helpful in situations in which, let's see. So the GROW model may be particularly fine and helpful in situations in which everything is kind of smooth sailing, all right? But in situations where the person doesn't have a clear understanding of their current performance, which is common enough. I mean, there's a psychological literature that suggests, people thrive on positive illusions or seeing ourselves in a little bit better light than maybe others see us or than we actually are. And that kind of helps us stay motivated, feel good about ourselves and such. But if you look at the data in terms of people's performance and ratings. One thing I read recently, 94% of college professors see themselves as above average teachers, for example, or, most people will rate themselves in the top 10 or 20% of most attributes at work, things like that. So there's a natural human challenge around this in that accurate feedback often might not look accurate. And also, as we noted, many organizations have decided to shift away from the annual performance appraisal simply because it hasn't been helpful. All right. And so if you look at these are organizations that have in recent years decided to abandon their annual performance appraisal. And what you see is, they're looking for better alternatives. So it sounds like a lot of you have been able to come to a pretty good balance in your organization, at least sort of 50% ish. And on the other hand, feedback is a challenge. And a recent survey of CEOs indicated that those who had executive coaches, 43% said they needed to work on confronting others, kind of managing conflict, things like that. So let's look at, what should we be thinking about? What should we know about this? So most employees want more feedback and better quality feedback than they're currently getting. You might also just ask yourself the question of, if we think about the impact of 360 feedback, how beneficial is it? And although it has potential, and so I think it's potentially useful, this just shows you the average results of people having received 360 feedback, and that it's slightly positive, but it kind of clusters around zero. So we're going to talk about a couple of things to think about in terms of quality of feedback, but also what do you do once you get some feedback. So feedback and coaching work nicely hand in hand together. But just to be clear, to not expect that feedback alone in terms of a 360 is necessarily going to lead to much change or development. Okay. Here are also just some examples of things I've seen people write in 360 feedback as far as a comment on the person. We can't trust Paul. Pat doesn't stand firm. Jane is not a team player, is contentious. Phil's a poor manager. And you see feedback like that also is of poor quality. It's not very informative, and it tends to spark defenses. The other thing is, we won't take the time to really work out this today, but there's a lot of reasons why that might happen according to the neuroscience that we know. So often it looks a little bit too much like this: bad dog. Could you be more specific? Okay. And so just as far as a couple of tips, and let us know if you'd like some additional resources on feedback, because we can pass that your way or make it available through the website also. But as I've looked at thousands of transcripts of feedback at this point, there tends to be a lack of specificity. Okay, so it's important to share not only our conclusions, but also the reasoning behind them and the examples or other data on which our conclusions are based. Okay, so specificity, and also dialogue, to ask questions and invite others to share their perspectives, disagreements, and concerns so we can better understand them, address them, and learn things we may have missed. Okay, and so without getting too much into the neuroscience behind it, um, back to the quote from Eric Schmidt, who said, none of us can see ourselves as others see us. It's particularly true when things get a little bit tense. And the feedback research also shows that the anxiety level for people receiving feedback is very high. And also, it tends to be almost equally high for the person who is giving the feedback. So what we found is that feedback is a learnable skill. So it's one of the underutilized skills, learnable skill. But if you want to just start with thinking about, okay, how can I do a little bit better? Two key places to begin are: one, specificity. And that often means taking a few minutes to think through specific examples that you can share with the other person. And the other thing to think about is the cognitive load. So from neuroscience, we know that people's minds don't process very well or very quickly when they're feeling threatened, when they're receiving feedback. So use dialogue. Ask questions, invite others to share their perspectives, disagreements, and concerns so we can better address them, learn from them, things that we might be missing to be more helpful in the conversation. Okay, so two key takeaways. And this is the odd thing, having worked on this for a long time, it'll seem specific enough to you. It often will be perceived as less specific than is helpful to the receiver. And also, slow down the pace a little bit, think a little bit less about what I want to say versus how are they receiving this. Am I letting them absorb it? Am I letting them process it? Am I filling in the gaps on anything that they're misunderstanding? Okay, so ideally, constructive feedback looks like the following. So you observe the behavior and to describe the impact. And this is in particular what tends to be missing from feedback conversations. And then to move forward in a coaching sense, to clarify the expectations and also specify consequences. So, what does good look like? What is our action plan? What are we going to do about this? Another common error I see in feedback is that after giving the feedback, people are so relieved they just leave it there rather than saying, okay, what next? And that's a crucial thing to where you want to add in the coaching piece. Okay, so observing behaviors, describing impact, really important. Here's also just as a quick takeaway to give you a set of questions that you might ask yourself before providing feedback. Okay, so how did I arrive at this conclusion? What examples, illustrations, etc., would I need to share with the other person in order for him or her to understand why I see it this way? Okay, and so that helps with the specificity part of it. Under what conditions have I observed the behavior to clarify? What do I see as the specific undesirable consequences of the behavior? So that goes to motivation. Do they understand why it matters, why it's a problem? Okay. And finally, what would be the most constructive way to help this person achieve better results? Okay. And with that, we're really looking to the coaching piece. So I haven't just delivered the feedback, but we're establishing some ongoing accountability with a coaching process, either using the GROW model or stop, start, continue, or some kind of methodology that is alternative if you prefer. Okay. Um, Final thought on feedback, and this is something that is quite powerful and tends to be underdone in organizations. But if you look at this right here, which is what you'll see is this question about after 360 feedback. You see at the top there, it says, did my coworker follow up? And what we find is that there's a huge difference and a huge opportunity for people to follow up or even take the initiative on getting some feedback or clarifications. Okay, so in particular here, if you look at the difference between somebody who just received the feedback and said, okay, thanks, and I'm going to work on it, versus somebody who checked in, you maybe chose one or two items and came back to their colleagues or peers or those who had rated them and said, hey, I would like to improve my delegation or listening or whatever it is that people have identified as an area to grow. And simply ask them, what's one thing I could do that would enhance my performance in this area? So that's called the follow-up factor by Marshall Goldsmith. And he recommends that after feedback, and you can also initiate this. A lot of time people feel sort of isolated in the current environment without that much communication, and simply to let others know, here's something I would like to work on, and just ask them the simple question, what's one thing I could do to enhance my performance in this area? If we go back to the Eric Schmidt quote where he says, people, we don't see ourselves, as others see us, often they'll have, just little nuggets of gold, things that are changeable that we can actually fix. I'll just give you one quick example. There was one woman executive, who traveled a lot, and she tried to have an open door policy so that she would be available to her people, but she was getting low scores. And what she didn't realize was that the way her computer was set up in her office, she would see those little Outlook messages blinking, and her eyes would go over to it. And people were taking that as she doesn't really care about what I'm saying. But she wasn't aware of it. And then it just took someone to say, oh, by the way, if you would do this, I think, it will be better. And so it was simply a matter of just, moving her computer to a different place, and her scores went up a lot after that. So let's just kind of look at the data for a second. So if we note, this is what happens without follow-up, but with follow-up, it's immensely improved. And so once again, this is not a common practice in organizations, but I think if you'll try this out, you'll get some interesting and usable insights, which is to choose, some people that you trust, perhaps some people that have rated you, and ask them, what's one thing I could do to enhance my performance in a particular area? The other thing you might have noticed is a lot of time, younger workers in particular like a lot of feedback, and this is a thing you can encourage them to go to others and get feedback, which is a great way for them to learn, but also to feel like they're getting the attention that they like. Okay, so Overall, we've covered a bit in terms of coaching outcomes. So if we think about in summary, what do we want to achieve as a coach? One, have we helped the person achieve an accurate perception of current performance if that's missing? Two, do they have a clear vision of the end state? Okay, and it's easy to underestimate, especially for new workers or less experienced workers, the lack of clarity they might have about what is desired, and have we made our expectations clear? Do they have a motivation to change, a means of making the change, and some ongoing assessment, support, and follow up? And likewise for our skills, to think about the developmental relationship. So the biggest predictor of people's development is the quality of the relationship, with the manager. You're probably aware people quit managers more than they quit jobs. And so to build a relationship in which there's a sense of trust and investment, and then to use the skills of listening and questioning versus telling, provide feedback as needed, help with goal setting, action planning, and ongoing assessment, support, and follow up. Okay. All right. And so just, in quick review, we talked a little bit about current trends and issues in the environment, looked a little bit about why is coaching important. So it tends to be one of the most desirable mechanisms of developing employees, but also one of the least well done. So there's a huge opportunity there. What is effective coaching? We gave you a couple of models, the GROW model, and also the stop, start, continue. And then finally, we looked a little bit around some of the challenges of feedback that is problematic for most managers, and a few tips about the importance of working on specificity and dialogue. And to note that what seems specific enough to us often is not perceived as specific to be useful by the individual who is receiving the feedback. Okay.
Mark, thank you so much for this super insightful presentation. I want to thank everyone for joining this morning. Just a reminder, leadership coaching live online is going to be held March 2nd through 4th. It's a fantastic program. So if you got a lot out of this, I highly recommend checking it out.
Thank you very much. And also Cheryl can put you in touch with me if that's helpful. We appreciate Cheryl and Nate and the chamber and just everything everyone is doing. And we just wish you all the best in these challenging times. So, thanks for hanging in there. Thanks for joining us today. We wish you all well. Take care.